All right. Hello, world. Podler team back again. Actually, we just stopped off from Mojo Dojo voicing there. We're now continuing some track 2 voicing. Glenn's getting credit for some catch-up work to solidify his L4 in the voicing. All right. We're now doing Mojo journalism. So let's jump right on into it. Glenn, can you write this down?
Sure.
All right. What is journalism? What is primitive journalism? What is modern journalism? What is Mojo journalism? Thousand tense.
So just 3 questions then?
4, right? Journalism, primitive journalism, modern journalism, Mojo journalism. 4.
Gotcha. All right, so let's see, what do we have here? Okay, so journalism in its largest context refers to any form of communication that humans use to express the story of the human experience to themselves or to others. In the primitive history of the human species, journalism can be seen in our proclivity for adornment, artifacts, cave drawings, and ample evidence of oral traditions in most ancient primitive cultures. Modern journalism can be thought of as when written languages becomes, or shouldn't I say becomes,
Yeah.
or becomes?
I think you're right. Go ahead.
Yeah, became prevalent with sophisticated definitions of culture and the physical sciences, all attempting to explain and document the human condition and the meaning of existence. Now, with the research that Podler is doing that is uncovering the fundamental mathematical principles that underlie all human activity, journalism has now become Mojo journalism. The fullest and truest interpretation possible of the human story. Mojo journalism just got an upgrade.
Upgrade.
Yeah, I was just thinking, back in the primitive days, journalism, one form of it's related to art, I think, in a certain sense, in that it got to a point where I think maybe this had to do with one of the documentaries that you told me to watch, but like the spear or whatever, like the tools that we used to use, after a certain point, carving them and making them sharp got to a point where it's like you can do that. Like humans, we learned how to do that. But then eventually it got to a point where they were like adding all kinds of like interesting artistic qualities to the spearheads or the arrowheads. They were giving it like like a flair to it. They were maybe little things, I guess you could say, that were like, why would anyone do that? It doesn't serve any practical purpose. But that's kind of like their way of infusing that kind of artistic and quality to the artifact that they were using in order to communicate to others. Like look at not just the fact that it's a cool it's an object that is used for like a certain purpose, but it's actually like it's meant to do something. It's meant to actually like communicate like the skill, the ideas behind the actual like production of it, like in an artistic sense. That's a kind of journalism right there.
Absolutely.
So
sure.
Adornments, any kind of thing that people use to sort of like,
because they didn't have to do that at all, and then when they did do it, there's lots of other ways they could have done it, but they chose that one. Those two things say a lot about a person.
Totally. All right. So journalism in its most largest context can be thought of as any sort of communication that humans use in order to express the story of the human condition, not only to themselves, but to other people. Or, like they might do it just for themselves, or they could do it for other people, for others as well. In the primitive sense, back in the old days when, cavemen were around and humans were, doing all that sort of stuff, the way in which we would use journalism then was by like doing cave drawings where we would tell stories with the drawings that we would have on the walls and stuff that showed like the way in which that they gathered food and the way that they were able to kill off this kind of like buffalo or whatever the case might be, whatever they hunted back in those days. That was a kind of journalism right there. Or in the formation of tools or products or anything like that, or adornments or anything like of that kind of nature. That's all the kind of journalism that was being done back in those times. Modern journalism came about, like we have YouTube now. We make YouTube videos and stuff like that. Podler, we're doing that as well. All kinds of people are doing these kinds of new kinds of technologies, but mainly it all started with like written languages, really being able to write books and get communication across to other people in that kind of a way. And then science, and when that came around, being able to really understand, the nature of everything around you and being able to express all of that really took our ability to journal to an even higher level. But now with Podlayer, because we have the Mojo phenomenon that we've discovered, it's really boundless and limitless just how much we're able to explain and teach as far as like what's out there and like how it relates to us and the human condition, because Mojo is very intimately tied to the human condition. It is the story literally of us and how we evolved and the peak pathways that we use, and that you really can't have journalism without that. And that's essentially at the heart of what journalism is. And now journalism just got that upgrade, which is it's now considered Mojo journalism, which is what we teach here at Podlayer.
Nice. All right, next up. Okay, what is the microcosm syndrome and what tends to cause it?
All right, that's easy. So there are several major discoveries people should know about. The microcosm syndrome refers to the fact that most bubble demographics are comprised of only a few different innate nature designs, whereas people are often under the mistaken impression that most bubble demographics are comprised of a much greater range of innate nature designs than usually occurs. This is due to differences between people of the same innate nature being accentuated because of proximity and familiarity. So what is it and what causes it, basically?
Mhm.
All right. I could put that up probably in my own words. All right, so when it comes to the microcosm syndrome, it refers to the fact that most bubble dynamics that are out there in the world that we currently have data on tend to not have a lot of variety of different mojos within them. And that creates the microcosm syndrome essentially, which is the lack of variety, I guess you could say, and the really focused, you know,
Actually, it's not
like
necessarily the lack of variety. It's just that because some actually have a decent variety, it's that people tend to always think there's more variety than there is.
right. I guess that's one. Yeah.
You try again, go from the top.
All right. All right. So the microcosm syndrome refers to the fact that most bubble dynamics, alchemies, they tend to have not too many different mojos that make them up, basically. However, people are under the mistaken impression that there's a lot more variety of mojos that are in those bubbles as compared to what the evidence shows us. Now, the fact what causes this issue is, you know, people's misperception of, you know, the dynamics that are taking place in bubbles is the fact that due to familiarity and proximity being such a being so being heightened in bubbles, people the differences between each individual mojos, even though, you know, like you might have two Naiji, for example, the differences are much more accentuated, which makes one feel as though that they're around someone who's much different than they are, and so that difference must mean that they are a different mojo entirely. However, that's not the case. It just so happens that there's a you know, there's the two people are the same mojo, but essentially they are very different riffs of the same mojo, or maybe they're not so different. But whatever the case might be, the fact is that the differences, whatever they might be, are much more heightened and they're much more accentuated, which creates that confusion. And so that's the microcosm syndrome.
Got it. Nicely done. All right, next up. What is gender dimorphism? Um, let's see. What has our research shown? What causes this? How has this informed on how we've been approaching the data?
What was the last part? How does this inform on?
On how we approach the data.
So, what is gender dimorphism? What has our research shown? What causes this? And how does this inform on how we approach the data?
Correct.
All right. So, in the available media of public figures in pop culture, there's a significant gender dimorphism between the amount of males and females being represented. In the initial 10,000 samples we canvassed, there was a ratio of 2 to 1, male over female. Our research shows that this is a reflection of misogynistic cultural conditioning and the corresponding available opportunities, not anything to do with innate ability or preferences, despite what many backward belief systems would have people believe. Accordingly, we are going out of our way to bolster our female numbers so our collection is more complete and representative of the reality of our evolution as a species, not the erroneous assumptions of the uninformed.
I changed that last fragment to say this. Okay, so our collection is more complete and representative of the reality of our evolution as a species, not just the portion of it that has more media exposure.
Sure. Cool. That sounds fine. Yeah, I think that makes more sense too, actually. The erroneous assumptions of the uninformed.
It's a little vague and aggressive. This is a little more tight and I think on point.
Right. Yeah, what do you think about despite what many backward belief systems? Does that seem a little bit aggressive, or does that seem okay?
Let me see.
I kind of noticed that. It kind of stuck out to me a little bit, but it's no big deal. I don't have any issues or anything like that.
I think that one might be needed. But I'm wondering if I need the word backward.
Right. Because backward, it makes me think like, what does that mean exactly?
Right. So I took that word out. So now it just reads, despite what many belief systems would have people believe.
What about other belief systems?
Despite what many other belief systems would have people believe.
In comparison to Podler, right? I mean,
Right. It's kind of implied because we lead a sentence off with our research shows that it's reflection. So that's our statement. Despite what many other. So yeah, that's the counterpoint. I think other does it good. Despite what many other belief systems would have us people believe. Cool.
awesome.
I think it's a little tighter now.
All right, let me see if we can do this. So, gender dimorphism refers to the significant, significant difference in the numbers between the males and the females in pop culture, especially given that that's the data pool that we've been looking at mainly right now, that Podler has canvassed. In terms of the fact that the males, there seems to be a 2-to-1 ratio. For every 2 males, there's only 1 female that we tend to find in pop culture. And given the initial 10,000 samples that we had, we have now since gone much farther than that. there was many more males in it, and there still continue to be many more males as compared to the females. Um, yeah, our research uh, has shown this, right? You already answered that. So the reason why this is caused is the fact that there's a lot of a misogynistic cultural conditioning that's taking place in the world as it is right now, and that's also, and there's also, in terms of like the opportunities that are available for the various sexes that are out there. And so, females, they may not necessarily have as much opportunity, and they're also, and this has a lot to do with, I think, just the fact that culturally conditioning, we're not quite there yet as far as having equality in terms of the sexes just yet. And then apart from that, or to add to that, Podler is basically attempting to correct this issue by trying to focus on trying to get more female samples, so that there are more females in the public eye's awareness and in pop culture that have been read. And so, yeah, that's essentially it.
Mhm. All right.
Why do we use the term gender dimorphism, Coach? Shouldn't it be sex dimorphism?
What's the difference?
Gender has to do with masculinity versus femininity, as far as like what someone thinks of as themselves, as either being masculine or feminine. Whereas sex has to do with the actual like biology of the individual, whether or not they're male or female. So you might have somebody that is a female but has a masculine makeup. So they might consider themselves a male, but they're actually, in terms of their body, biologically speaking, they're a female.
I think that it works either way, and I actually prefer gender because I do like to just kind of go with um, how the masculine and feminine are portrayed in media. The feminine approach, even if that is a choice or a difference between one's sexual organs, there still just are. Um, there's a prejudice for male in pop culture as far as being given prominence. If you actually look up just like people are famous without going to specific bubbles with intent, then the males are put forward more.
So that would be sex dimorphism.
I don't think so.
Or you know what? Let's not even worry about that. Let me just get this beat. No, actually, I got the beat already, didn't I? So let's do the next one.
Oh, gotcha. All right. So let's see. Um,
Should I just read it out?
um, yeah, I think I'm just going to go with this for the question. Is how does bias relate to the story of humans? And then give 3 examples. That's the question. That makes sense?
How does bias relate to
seeing the truth of the human story, and then give 3 examples.
All right. So natural law favors all innate nature designs equally, which is why they evolved the way they have. Although cultural conditioning can often skew the true story beyond recognition. In general, there is a significant bias against adaptive innate nature designs in favor of directive ones, called the directive bias. This is also compounded with the prevalent view in many parts of the world that females should be adaptive and males should be directive, despite the fact that the data clearly shows the various innate nature designs are spread evenly among the males and females. Another thing that skews the true story is that there are more interpretive innate nature designs in pop culture than there are literals. As much as I love the fact that there are lots of interpretives out there, there is definitely that issue, which is that there should be more literals in pop culture as well. Like Naiji. I mean, I have so many Naiji references now.
Right.
It's good to have that, to flesh it out, but every Mojo is related to every other Mojo, and you can learn something from every single one of them. So, there should also be more literals. There should also be more all the other ones as well. You should be able to learn how to relate to all the different gender Mojos, basically. So generally speaking, there's just a directive bias that exists in general, in anything basically.
Yes.
Right. Even though females are preferred to be adaptive.
Again?
So even though females are preferred to be adaptive by culture.
Culturally, right, but not by
natural. Right. 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 Okay. So basically, when it comes to natural law and the way that it does everything, it favors all of these 16 different Mojo designs and all the different gender Mojos equally. So there is not a preference for any one in favor of any of the others. But there's, given cultural conditioning, this has been something that uh, this creates an issue of there being certain kinds of biases that tend to come up in the way in which different mojos are being represented. As previously mentioned, there's obviously the fact that there's more males, and I think that's somewhat related to that is the fact that there's generally speaking, there's more of a directive bias, which connects to the next point, which is that there's when it comes to females, they're preferred by cultural conditioning to be more adaptive, and males tend to be more preferred towards being directive. And they're culturally those qualities are more acceptable, whereas the opposite tends to be less favorable according to culture and what it says it wants. And this is an issue because there's nothing in the data that shows so far that males are more directive than females are being adaptive, or males are more directive as compared to adaptive, and females are more adaptive as compared to directive. There tends to be an even spread among all of the different sexes, that there's a balance between all the different mojos being represented, directive and adaptive. Another bias that tends to come up is the fact that in pulp culture there's a lot more interpretives as compared to the literals. So there's another bias there as well that all comes from the fact that cultural conditioning has brought this upon, but none of these actually should exist in the way that they do, in the sort of imbalance that it is currently in. So yeah,
That works. What is the misperception of rarity? What can let's see. Second question will be, the first question will be the first two sentences. So then the next one is, what can exasperate this? And then how does this relate to people reading their own mojo? Do you get that?
yeah, I believe so. What is misperception of rarity? What exasperates this? Exacerbates? What's that mean exactly? Like, makes this worse?
Makes it worse.
Yeah, and how does this relate to people reading their own mojo? All right, so misperception of rarity refers to the trend that many people believe some innate nature designs to be far rarer than others. This is not true, as our research indicates that the spread of different innate nature designs is fairly even among the populace. There are areas of high concentrations of certain designs which can confuse those who have mainly only experienced a limited swath of humanity. Less than 25% of people can accurately determine their innate nature design without prior training. Plus, cultural expectations make certain designs more validated, confusing people that some designs are rare or more valuable. All right, so misperception of rarity refers to the misconception that many people have in terms of the level of concentration of, specific mojos in the populace, when in fact the research and the data that shows basically that there tends to be much more of an even spread among the populace. So there are no high concentrations as far as like the overall general in terms of humanity goes. However, in culture, there tends to be a lot of concentrations, or in certain bubbles, there tend to be higher concentrations of certain mojos. And this can cause issues in terms of, people coming to these beliefs that there's that certain mojos are more or less rare than others. Because if a person has only experienced a limited, sampling of the populace, uh, then they're going to have naturally a much more skewed view of how many mojos there are given the entire population, because they only have a very small sample, and that sample was not a very good indicator, given the fact that that sample was just a limited sample. It should be much more taken from the entire general populace, uh, which is something that might be hard to do, but it can definitely be done. It should be done. Pollard has done that. So this relates to people misreading themselves, which is just a little data statistic that to throw out there is that most people who haven't been read by Podler tend to misread themselves as being some other mojo, and it's usually a 25% accuracy rate that they go by. So 75% of the time they usually get themselves wrong. So this is also partially due to the fact that there's all kinds of cultural expectations, and certain designs might be put up on a pedestal while others are being put down. And so there's, like, if you're this mojo, then that means that you're better, and so people have a natural desire to want to be those mojos, but you can't choose your mojo. You are the mojo that you are, basically. However, that doesn't stop people from inappropriately kind of creating these kinds of desires of wanting to be something that they may not necessarily be, and that also just exacerbates the issue with misperception of rarity.
I just looked at the word exasperate, and it actually means to like irritate intensely. That's what the
Right.
joke word, but it's often used in the context of like making a situation worse. And you know what I mean?
Right. So culture is making the situation worse.
It's a confused conditioning it gives people. Yeah, it is. All right. Next up, let's see here. Okay. I changed the statistics right now to 90%, not 99. So just note, and I'll have even more update number when Johnny and I finish, like tabulating the actual cases we have. But anyway, what is the discovery of same-sex family members related to Mojo? How does this relate to family demographics?
What was the first one again, Coach?
Basically, what is the discovery of um, the trend of Mojo in same-sex family members? And then how does this relate to family demographics? Or actually technically predicting family demographics.
How does this relate to family dynamics?
Predicting family demographics.
Oh, predicting. All right. So, what is the discovery of the trend in same-sex family members, and how does this relate to predicting family dynamics?
Yep.
All right. So, a key discovery from our research is that Mojo designs run in same-sex family members, in a highly consistent pattern. There is it says 99.9, but we're going to go with 90% because that's what Coach said. Statistical probability that biologically related same-sex family members will have the same innate nature design, although obviously there are massive variation differences and every person is unique. This gives highly accurate predictions for family demographics without needing to see all the members. So there's strong predictive ability, however, it's still predictive. It's not like you would actually have to have the person be read in order for it to be confirmed.
Correct.
Yeah. But definitely there is something to it, which is that, there's some kind of, genes and stuff being,
We do it all the time where we read the samples. I mean, we never say what they are without actually reading the samples. But a lot of times when you actually already read like two brothers and you find out, they have a third brother, you're like, chances are it's going to be with the other.
Yeah, you're just like,
yeah.
I don't want to bias myself or anything, but there definitely does seem to be a trend here. And so
very strong one.
You may want to choose to try that Mojo out first to just to see, but then also give all the other Mojos a try as well to see if yeah. So as far as Mojo reading goes, I suppose the only difference that it makes is that you might feel more inclined to want to try out that one Mojo first, but you really have to go through them all, so it doesn't make any difference.
Process like you always do, yeah, definitely. But this is actually after we've done the work. So
yeah,
it's a very good point, Glenn. The purpose of actually this, obviously, besides just general knowledge, but the specific thing as far as a spell, where I tend to use this is not in Mojo reading. You're right. Actually, Mojo reading, you want to go into your fifth gear and just be detached but interested, and then the answer is whatever it is. But where I use this quite a lot is when people push back on them being different design than their sister, brother, or whatever. You know what I mean? Whichever's related here. And then I have to tell them, okay, there is a chance that you're different, but just so you know, the chances that you are, you know what I mean? Because people tend to actually think isn't it weird that me and my sister would get the same Mojo design when we're so different? So it's first, most people misread themselves, but beyond that is actually, it's much more, it makes them a little more at ease getting over the fact that they and their same-sex family member are the same when you tell them that, one, obviously the riffs can be very different, but also that this is quite common. It's actually quite common to be the same design, so it's not odd in any way. For some reason, people need to be told that.
Yeah, I think the reason has to do with the fact that they might not want to see themselves in the other person. I think this is a very strong part of it, which is, I come from a Nijez family, for example, and not to say anything bad about my dad or my parents or my sisters or anything like that, but I didn't want to be considered the same as them. I just wanted to feel like I was different. Yeah. So I kind of put myself, when I was, before I had my Mojo read officially, that I was a Zaini or an INTP. And that made me feel different. I felt like, yeah, I'm good. But I read my dad correctly as an INFJ, even though that is also incorrect in terms of the fact that it's MBTI. But I read him correctly, I suppose.
Right, you're reading his energy fields.
I was reading his energy fields, but I wasn't able to see those same similarities in myself. And then when I found out that I was an IG, then I was like, I'm an IG. And then my dad's probably an IG. And so that means that we're the same Mojo. And then I was like, oh no, I don't want to be like my dad, I don't want to be the same as that. But I realized, no, I'm not the same as my dad. I'm not the same person. So yeah, right. I was different before, and I'm still different now. It just so happens that we happen to be the same Mojo. So that's just something that needs to be understood right off the bat. And maybe you don't necessarily have the best relationship with your inspirational other in terms of the people that are around you, but that doesn't necessarily mean anything bad on your part. That just means that you guys might not necessarily be aware of the dynamic that's taking place in front of you. And even among ideal inspirational pairings, it's not always going to be like the best of the best right off the bat. There's different riffs of various different inspirationals, and so not everyone is going to be able to be perfect, like match for one another. So if you happen to get into arguments and stuff, that doesn't mean that, oh no, I'm a bad human being. I suck with my other. Like
Right.
it just means that maybe there is an element of that. Maybe you can become better, and you should definitely work on that. But you should also understand that it's not always going to be a perfect kind of thing, where you're supposed to be just like absolutely with every single person that is your inspirational other. You're supposed to be like 100% like awesome with them. It's just not always possible like that.
So one of the top benefits of your other among all your spirits is the learning process, and learning involves making mistakes.
Right. But having
Where
that
we
awareness is very, very key, because then you know how to see the interactions that you have with the people around you and what's going on. You're able to see it from a completely different level, the math of everything that's taking place, and then you want to become better at it.
definitely.
So that's always a good thing. Whenever you take any sort of relationship and you want to improve upon anything, basically, it's always a good thing. So yeah, I just gotta read that. I read out the beat, so now I'm gonna study it now.
Gotcha.
Okay, so there's a discovery that's been recently made in terms of this, same-sex family members, in that they tend to be highly similar in terms of the mojos that tend to be. So Naiji, dads, they tend to have Naiji sons who tend to have Naiji sons themselves, and then the dad usually had a grandfather and a dad himself that was also a Naiji. And there's a strong statistical probability in terms of that being consistently among family trees and that sort of stuff, genealogy and all that sort of thing. It's still not 100%, but it is very much 90% of the time it tends to be that way. And so this creates a lot of predictive abilities in terms of what you can expect to see in any sort of like a mojo, as far as like what different people in your family are going to be as far as what their mojos are, given if they're the same sex. um,
Yeah, you got it.
okay.
That was it. That was a shorter one. Okay, the next paragraph we actually covered in another section, I believe. So we're going to go down to cultural and historic analogs.
Okay. All right.
All right, let's see. Um, what are cultural and historic analogs? What is an example? How does this relate to different regions? How does this relate regionally, and then how does this relate historically? You got that? We do it again.
Just one sec. Historic analogs. So, what are cultural and historic analogs? That's the first one. That's all I got so far.
Okay. Second is example.
All right.
Third is how does this relate culturally? And then how does this relate historically?
So, culturally and historically.
Correct.
So, our research gives profound insight through cultural and historic analogs with corresponding predictive power. Scientists frequently use modern native animal analogs to study other animals that may be extinct or difficult to find. which allows for great understanding of animals that would otherwise be geographically or historically unavailable. Thus, if you know the innate nature demographics of a career bubble from several different cultures, you can often predict what they will be in another culture that you may not have canvassed yet. Likewise, if you know the innate nature demographics of a given cultural bubble for one generation, it gives predictive powers as to the demographics of previous and future generations. I'm kind of having a hard time grasping what this is talking about, this beat. What are cultural and historic analogs? Like,
Basically, for example, things that aren't necessarily equivalent, but there's a high likelihood of crossover. So, for example, let's say music's a good one. All right, so we in seeing the music scene from the United States, when we canvassed other music scenes, they weren't exactly the same. When you get into Euro pop and you get into the Asian music and so forth, there are shifts, in some significant shifts, but not as many surprises as if we had never done a music bubble before. Having done the US music bubble gave us an analog to go with, so we could have some foreshadowing of what we're going to be seeing.
oh, nice, right?
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And then historically, so that's culturally, historically, is that okay? It looks like right now, and if we canvas, let's say, a certain career bubble, like well, we can take acting again, I guess. For example, we said TV timeline. Perfect. Knowing what the Mojos are in all the shows we're currently watching, when we went back and looked at the older shows, there were some slight changes in trends when you went back to the older eras, getting the black and whites, but not as many surprises as if we done it from scratch. Having done the modern TV shows, when we did the older ones, and as we do new ones going forward, there's been new shows, they'll have demographics. We never quite seen that exact show before, but we've seen a lot of TV.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're probably going to be seeing variations on a trend. So does that make sense? So historically, meaning if you go backwards or forwards in time, if in one point in time you read a whole bunch of baseball players, then when you go back in time or forward in time, you can have some predictability. Same thing if you've read a bunch of baseball players from the US and then you go to Mexico to read Mexican teams, you can have some, foreshadowing, predictability of what you'll be seeing there as well. Does that make sense?
Makes perfect sense. Yeah, it's in terms of the scientists, I'm thinking about like how, like we have certain kinds of theories as far as like how the dinosaurs they looked,
Right.
how they behaved, how they, whether or not they had feathers or not, or what, these kinds of things. And that's all based on the evidence and knowledge that we have of animals currently.
Exactly.
And as far as like species that might be out there right now that haven't been discovered, based on other things about them, like the fact that they might be related to a species of like of an ape or something. We know generally what to expect, although there might be some differences here and there. So that's it's as much as there might be differences, there's also similarities, and those similarities are what you can track in order to then be able to kind of like find where those footsteps lead to,
Exactly.
those little footsteps in the sand or whatever, clues. All right. So cultural and historical analogs refers to any sort of like patterns that can be used in order to then figure out, like in a given bubble, what another bubble is likely to be like. And so it gives predictive abilities in terms of what to expect as far as the Mojo designs that might be within that bubble, or whatever sort of similarities might be an extension that might lead into that bubble as a result of that as a result of that analog. An example would be sort of like how scientists, they study different species of animals, and if it has to do with like a previous generation of animal, like the dinosaurs or something, there's an expectation that they probably behave very similarly to many different reptilian, amphibian kind of creatures that we have currently on our planet right now, like the that huge lizard, that huge reptile lizard. What is that called? The Locomodo or something?
The Komodo?
Komodo, yeah, the Komodo dragon. Like that seems, or like the crocodile or something. They're, these are kinds of like historical species analogs, kind of things that we can use, or in terms of same species, or species of the same time, like finding different species out there of like an ape or something. You look at orangutans and you look at chimpanzees, and you notice that the behavior of this other third species that we haven't discovered yet seems to be behaving more like a chimpanzee. So that leads us to then want to figure out that they're probably going to look like a chimpanzee. They're probably going to have similar behavioral things, although there might be some variations. This is related to historically in terms of Mojo designs, in the sense that going back in time in acting, for example, there used to be different, like little specifically, like very specific differences as far as like the different Mojo designs that showed up in TV and movies and stuff like that. But generally, for the most part, given modern day actors and actresses, there seems to be a very very similar spread of the same Mojos that are basically among both time frames. And then culturally speaking, you might look to view music or sports or something like that. And in music, for example, you might have like country artists, which tend to have like a certain bubble demographic to it, with certain mojos being a little bit higher or less, more or less in, within that little tiny sphere. But then for the most part, though, you can cross contextualize and kind of understand that all the other music aspects in those bubbles also seem to be the same general mojos, like the Naiji, for example, tend to be very highly represented. This can even spread across water, for example, in terms of like the Asian population and how many different kinds of mojos that tend to make those up. And the fact that they also tend to show a lot of Naiji males, for example. Although there might be more V literal mojos in terms of like specifically, but there tend to be, generally speaking, the same overall spread, as far as like given the fact that you've already researched that bubble and you kind of have a grasp and an understanding and a handle on that general scene. And so whenever humans do that kind of an activity, there is likely to be a repeating of that same pattern wherever they might be, backwards in time, forwards in time, or culturally in the same time period. So yeah,
Yeah,
interesting.
indeed. All right, so now we're start getting into some of the bubbles. All right, so first, why don't you basically tell me about acting? Um, and generally with that, you'll tell me males and females. And then in this case, can you also touch on variations within this bubble? So yeah, tell me males, females, and variations, trend variations.
All right. So tell me about acting. Tell me about males, females, and variations. I'm not even bothering typing like entire sentences out. I'm just
No,
doing keywords.
I didn't think you were. That's why I didn't speak them in full sentences. I try to like make fragments because I thought that's what you were doing.
Yeah.
You're like a detective with a pad.
Right. So now for
Red hair? Question mark. You know what I mean? It's not a full sentence. It's just like 1, 2 words. The question mark.
you get the idea basically, right? So you don't need to. All right, so let me read out the beat here, and then I'll answer it, or I'll put it in my own words and do it off book, or not off book.
Yeah, that's right. I'll put.
Yeah. So now for a little bit about some of the major bubbles we've canvassed so far. In the movies and TV bubble, the most represented males are the Naiji, Naizi, Jinai, Nijai, and Jaini. Should I do hand signs?
Uh,
I think I want to do hand signs.
yeah.
I think it would be a good teaching. All right, so now for a little bit about some of the major bubbles we've canvassed so far. In the movies and TV bubble, the most represented males are the Nai-ji, the Nai-z, the Ji-nai, the Jai, and the... With the females, the most represented designs are the Ni-jai, or no, Ni-jai, Ni-zai, the Naiji, that's two open hand, the Jai, Jaini, the Ji Nai, and the Jai. This is for the acting roles. The demographics for directors and writers are different. Also, even within the acting roles, there are significant variations on the general demographic trends based on different genres. So yeah, different genres, different Mojo designs, percentages, and stuff like that. Like Disney tends to have more Vijay, I think, right?
Exactly. It's a Disney, right?
Yeah. Did that sound like something else?
I just make sure I didn't mishear that.
Okay, cool.
I guess maybe my ear was not expecting a brand name, and so I'll make sure that's in fact what I heard.
Okay. All right, so even in the, I thought the Nizai females were more represented than even the Nijai.
They are just, that's funny you mentioned that. I already updated that. I moved the knees out of the front there, and for the dudes, I moved Nizi to the front.
Oh, so the Naizi is even more than the Naiji?
In acting, yeah.
Oh. Those are the only two differences, right? No other changes?
Yeah, I think that's good. I'll, of course, revisit this once we get the sample store program up and running. I'm going to get, even more real tight on this Rosetta Stone and come back in here and see if we need to revise anything.
Sure.
This, I think, is still a solid understanding
Mm-hmm.
of the sitch.
All right, so hold on, let me get that first beat. I was doing the males and females. I was focusing so hard on that, I forgot to do the first one.
Oh no, I think that's all I need.
Tell me about acting. How do I? That I mean, just
You don't need
we've
to.
canvassed.
No, it's just males. It's just three things. When I say tell us about, it means males, females, and in this case also
Variations.
variations.
All right. So when it comes to the bubble of acting and the bubble of acting in movies and TV, when it comes to the males, there tend to be a strong representation for the Naizi, the Naiji, the Jinai, the Nijai, and the Jaini. For the females, there tends to be a significant amount of Nizai, Nijai, Naiji, Jaini, Jinai, and Vijai. However, there's always variations in any sort of bubble, and the acting bubble is no different. Uh, in directing and all those in directing and producing and that sort of stuff, there's also variations there as well. But even among like acting, like if you go different genres, for example, or different brand names, I suppose you could say as well, the difference between the various mojos and how many show up and which kinds show up and the percentages that they show up, that can change a little bit here and there as far as that goes in terms of the males and the females.
Good. All right, base the same thing for music artists.
All right, let's go to get the mojos. All right, so in the area of music artists, the most represented males are Naiji and Nijai. With
I added 2 to that. Please also add in the 2 AdSense males. So it's the Naiji, Nijai, Bijai, and Jaivi.
Vijay and Jaivi. I think I can remember. Vijay, Jaivi, Vijay, Jaivi. Okay, so in the area of music artists, the most represented males are the Naiji, Nijai, Vijay, and Jaivi, with also, to a lesser extent, the Jaini, Naizi, Jinai, and Vaiji. With the females, the most represented designs are the Nijai, Naiji, Vijay, Jaini, Jaivi, and Jivai. Again, there are significant variations on these general trends based on different genres, such as rap versus country. All right. So, in the bubble of music artists, close. Do not want to see the answers. Okay, so in the bubble of music artists, in terms of the males, the most highly represented mojo designs that tend to show up would include the Naiji, the Nijai, the Vijai, the Jaivi, the Jaini, the Naizi, the Jinai, and the Vaiji. When it comes to the females, there tends to be a high concentration of Nijai, Naiji, Vijay, Jaini, Jaivi, and Jivai. Of course, there's variations among even those groups. Like, for example, the rap genre as well and the country genre tend to have some differences as far as which mojos are represented and how much.
Nice. All right. The same thing for comedy, but I've changed that first line. You know where it says the Naiji, Nizi, Nijai, Nizai, basically the four lead interpretives?
The Nizi, Nizai, Naiji, and Nijai?
Huh? You said part? I'm changing that to just Nizi and Nizai, the two Nizes. And then I add Naiji and Nijai into the next line that says the remaining interpretives, blah, blah, blah. The remaining interpretives, I add the Naiji and Nijai there. I think it's more accurate with the data I have.
Okay, so it basically in the area of comedy, the most represented innate natures are very similar between males and females, which are the Nizi and Nizai. Boom,
Yes.
right? And then you go into the complement, the lesser known mojos, and that's where the Naiji and Nijai show up.
Yep.
Basically, the two lead interpretives is what I should say afterwards. That the remaining interpretives,
The two Nizes.
the two nizes. Yeah, I think that makes sense. The two nizes. The remaining interpretives, the Naiji, the Nijai, the Zaini, Jaini, Zinai, Jinai, that sort of thing, right?
Yep.
Okay, gotcha. All right, so I'm gonna read out the beat one time.
That's good.
In the area of comedy, the most represented innate natures are very similar between males and females, which are the Nizi and Nizai, basically the Nizes. The remaining interpretives, the Naiji, the Nijai, the Zaini, Jaini, Zinai, and Jinai, are the next most represented. Those with literal innate natures rarely, if ever, show up, except for the notable exceptions of the Vizai male and Jivai female. Again, there are notable differences within this trend based on comedic genre. Like, for example, even though Vaiji are not necessarily known for being comedians, when they get together and on their news programs and stuff, they might feel more inclined to want to do little jokes and stuff. So that's a kind of comedy, but it's not the same kind of comedy, obviously. But there's,
Right. There's
yeah,
a difference between like having a sense of humor and being a comedian.
yeah. And their humor tends to be more like in the office kind of humor, I guess. I don't know. I don't know how you would describe it.
I don't know, it's it's very funny, but it doesn't go out to as many markets as well as some other humor does.
All right, I think I got this. All right, in the bubble of comedy, there tends to be a strong representation of interpretives in general that make it up, with the two most leading mojos being the Nizi and the Nizai, basically the Nizes. The second most, the second grouping of, that's second to the Nizi and Nizai as far as like the overall general number of mojos that show up would include the Naiji, the Nijai, the Zaini, the Jaini, and the Jinai and the Zinai. That would be like the second tier of how common those mojos tend to come to be. The third tier would include the literals, which hardly if ever show up in the bubble of comedy. However, when they do, they tend to show up in the form of the Vizai male and the Jivai female. Interesting to note those just in general, but yeah, the literals tend to show up too. However, obviously, there's obviously going to be variations, and that depends on the genres that get into the different comedies. Like, it might seem kind of interesting that comedy has genres, but there are obviously different tastes and styles to it, and so depending on what that is, you might see a bit of a different spread of mojos.
Indeed. Nice. All right. Let's say one more beat. Let's do one more beat. Last one for the night is time about the writing bubble.
Cool. No changes here?
No.
All right. So in the area of writing, the most represented innate natures are the same for both genders. In fiction writing, they are the Naiji and Nijai. Oh, Naiji and Nijai need to be color coded.
Yeah, I got that. Thank you.
Yeah. And Jaini. With nonfiction writing, it is the Vaiji, Naiji, Nijai, Zinai, and Vaizi. Journalistic writing is usually comprised of Zinai, Vaiji, and Vaizi. There are also several niche genres with totally different demographics, such as comedic writing, which has a lot of Naizi and Nizai, or comic or cookbook writing, which has a notable number of Vijay. Okay. Fiction writing, nonfiction writing, journal writing, and comedic writing.
Actually, that's subgenres. And there's two
Those are all
examples.
subjects.
The last question is about subgenres, which gives the example of cookbooks and comedy books.
Oh, right. Cookbooks too, yeah.
Right, cookbooks and comedy books would probably both be under nonfiction. They're sub-bubbles of nonfiction.
Right.
Fiction,
All right, I got you.
Journalism, sub-bubbles.
All right, let me see if I can do this one. Right, when it comes to the bubble of writing, there tends to be a significant amount of different mojos in general that make it up. Specifically, when it comes to fiction writing, the Naiji, the Nijai, and the Jaini tend to show up quite a bit. When it comes to nonfiction writing, the Naiji, the Nijes tend to show up quite a bit again, but there's also the Vi Alpha, the Vaiji, and the Vi-Z, as well as the Z-Nai. When it comes to journalistic writing, it tends to be mainly comprised of the Z-Nai, the Vi-Ji, and the Vi-Z. And there's also certain niche sub bubbles, if that makes sense. That like cooking and comedy, for example, which have other mojos that tend to be radically different from what's typically expected. But obviously they're obviously still there as well. So, for example, like the comedic bubble of writing tends to be mainly made up of Naizi and Nizai, and then when it comes to writing cookbooks, for example, those tend to have a lot of Vijay in them.
Good. Bam. Perfect time. So, call for the evening.
Right? Cool.
All right, we'll keep on cracking on this. We'll have this done no time too.
All right.
You want to do Monday then?
Sure. I think maybe Monday, maybe even Wednesday too.
Cool. All right. Have a wonderful evening. Hope you feel better.
Yeah, I'm feeling good. I just ate, right? So
I got you.
I'm getting burps.
It happens. All right. Have a good night.
Yeah, you too. Good night.